everyone, welcome to Christina Cakes It. I'm Christina and today I'm making a Minnie Mouse cake. So the reason I'm making this cake is because my good friend Erin, her daughter Scarlett is turning 3, and Scarlett loves Disneyland and especially loves Minnie Mouse. And when asked what she wants for her birthday, the only thing that Scarlett really wanted was a cake with candles. And so when coordinating with Erin, we came up with the perfect design for her, and I'm so excited to share it with you guys. So the first thing I'm going to focus on with my Minnie Mouse cake is the actual cake topper, the Minnie Mouse ears with the bow. And it's really important that you start this well ahead of time. So I recommend at least 2 days prior to kneading it because our fondant has to dry. I'm actually doing this 4 days in advance. And so this is what the topper is going to look like. Super cute. So I'm going to start with my black fondant that I'm going to roll out, and it's going to be pretty thick because these ears do need to stand up. And I'm going to insert a really thick toothpick. You can also use a cake pop stick as well. But the moral of the story is we want very thick fondant for this. And I'm just using a circle cutter that I have. And I kind of measured the size against the 6-inch cake that I'm going to be using. And this was the size of ear that I liked. Actually, I think I want this one even thicker, so I'm going to re-roll that. So now that I have these thick ears, I'm going to insert this toothpick into the center. And if your toothpick is kind of coming out a little bit in the back like mine, I'm actually going to put like a fondant safety over this. Kind of like a little fondant band-aid to hold it in. So you can adhere this with water. Water will stick fondant to fondant. I'm going to use my trusty Wilton Dab and Hold, my favorite product. So the ears are very easy, and as I mentioned, they do need to set aside. I recommend at least 2 days to really firm up and harden. And on the cake topper I made, I actually attached the bow directly to the ears. But I'm going to show you another way that will actually work better. You can attach the bow to the ears, that's totally fine, but I like this way better. So for the famous mini bow, what I have done is I actually copied and pasted an image of Minnie onto a Word document, printed it off, and then I cut out the shape of the bow. And then from a little trial and error, I figured out that the fondant, just a fondant bow for me, I couldn't get it to not break. It was like too flimsy. So here's the trick. You're going to actually want to cut out a cardboard outline of the bow. This is really sturdy. I actually cut it out from a cake board. And what I did is I just taped some toothpicks to the back. You could use hot glue, I just couldn't find my glue gun. And then this is gonna go directly into the cake. And it's gonna go right in front of the ears like that. And this to me is the sturdiest option. So I'm gonna work with my cardboard template that I cut out ahead of time. So in the images that my friend Erin sent me, she sent me, all the minis were pink base rather than red base. So there's like different versions of Minnie. So her daughter seems to want pink Minnie Mouse, so that's what we're going with. And to make this color, I used AmeriColor gel food coloring in soft pink and just my homemade marshmallow fondant recipe. So I'm gonna roll this out. And I'm just gonna trace around the bow. This does not have to be completely perfect. In fact, you actually kind of want to make it a little bit bigger. I'm just going to smooth out any little lumps and bumps here. I'm actually rolling it out a little bit more to stretch over the sides of the cardboard. I'm going to start cutting away some of this excess fondant, but not all of it, because I do want the fondant to stretch over the sides of the cardboard to cover, like I don't want the cake or the cardboard to show. And my fondant is sticking to the cardboard really nicely because it's pretty soft. And if for some reason your fondant is not sticking to your cardboard outline, you can put a little bit of the Wilton dab and holds on the cardboard directly before you lay the fondant over. So what I'm doing now is I'm just wrapping fondant over the edge of the cardboard, and I'm just tapping to get that bow shape. Now that I have the bow on the cardboard, I'm actually going to take my fondant doweling tool and I'm going to lightly make like indentations, these bow marks. And for me, I'm just going to eyeball it. So I'm going to lightly press into the fondant, not too hard because I don't want to rip it. And what I'm going to do now is start sticking on the polka dots, and I just cut out a bunch of tiny little fondant circles. I actually started with bigger like fondant circles, and they like just didn't look good on the bow. So a lot of times when I'm doing a tutorial for YouTube, I do a lot of practice off camera beforehand, just because there's so much trial and error, and sometimes there's like a vision of something that I think is gonna look great and then it honestly doesn't look so good. So there's a lot of practice off camera. And for this next step, I'm using an Americolor edible marker in black. There's a lot out there. This is the brand I actually really like. I've had good results. And I'm just going to carefully trace over those imprints just to give like more detail to show that contrast. It really pops against that pink. All right, so you can see we now have all of our toppers prepped, and it's gonna look something like this when it goes onto the cake. I just thought doing these as separate pieces would be really helpful. It's more sturdy, and this cake is gonna be transported, so I always have that in mind when I'm thinking about cakes that are gonna be delivered. I always think about that car ride. It is very stressful. So these are going to sit out. Mine are gonna be sitting out for 4 days, just in open air to dry up. But as I mentioned, at least 2 days ahead of time, you wanna start your toppers because they need to harden. So I'm now ready to start putting my cake together. And for the base, I am using chocolate. That was the request of the birthday girl. You guys can see I've already stacked and crumb coated, and this is a 4-layer 8-inch cake, and this is a 4-layer 6-inch cake. So I'm gonna start by giving this a first layer of pink frosting. So for the bottom tier, I'm gonna start making some decorations so it doesn't look so plain. And I'm gonna start by making like a little plaque that goes on the side of the cake with the number 3. So I'm using a fondant impression mold. I used this on the castle cake and I absolutely loved it. I definitely recommend using these. They add just like a little something extra. And I just searched Disney font to get this number 3, so I feel like that like Walt Disney like lettering is iconic, and I definitely wanted to incorporate it onto this cake. add a little mini bow to my little plaque. I think it'll look so cute. So I'm just using this little bow mold. I've used it before, I really like it. So I'm just pressing my fondant in and I'm gonna cut away the excess. Next is I'm just going to cut out some white polka dots to put all over the pink bottom tier. Alright, so my cakes are frosted and I did put them in the fridge to chill. You do want your cakes really crusted and cold before you stack them. And so I'm now going to put my top tier onto my bottom tier. So what I'm doing here is I'm marking the exact middle because my center dowel is obviously going to go through it. And I'm just lightly going around a 6-inch cake board because I want to know where to put in my straws. So next I'm going to finally work on my Minnie Mouse face. And what I'm doing is I'm rolling out a little bit of ivory fondant. So to make Minnie's face, I traced like from a template onto parchment paper. And this is a really similar technique to when I made my Drake cake. And what I'm gonna do is I'm pinning it down with like really fine pins, just so I can trace, or I can cut around this pretty easily. It actually looks like Minnie Mouse is getting acupuncture with these pins. So I'm gonna keep these in place and I'm gonna take my fondant doweling tool and I'm actually going to press in over all the like pencil marks I have here. So this is gonna be my guide when I'm gonna finish adding all the facial features. I want everything placed where it needs to go. So after I pull off the template, I can see I have my indentations just as I want. And I'm lightly smoothing over the little pin marks. We don't need any evidence that Minnie had acupuncture / Botox. So to make all of Minnie's little facial features, what I did is I took that picture that I printed off of Minnie Mouse and I basically cut out all of the little features like one by one, which you can see here. And I'm cutting these out ahead of time. You can definitely do this, you know, when you are actually decorating your cake, but I like to do things in pieces because it helps save time. So I'm cutting these out a few days ahead of time and I'm just gonna store them in Tupperware with wax paper. So now I'm ready to start placing in all of Minnie's fondant facial features, and they should fit into the indentations. So before I actually adhere these with my edible glue, I'm actually going to trace all my indentations first. And I'm using a really thin edible marker. And I'm just tracing over all of my indentations. So you could also use like little tiny strips of fondant to do all this, but I actually thought this would be easier. So after I have traced all over the indentations and gotten it to look like how I want, I am going to use some dab and hold just to adhere all my pieces. Alright, Minnie has a face, and I'm going to go ahead and put this onto the side of the cake. So I'm going to go ahead and stick my face onto the side of the cake, and I actually am just putting the template here because I'm going to paint, because I'm actually painting Wilton Dab and Hold directly onto the cake, just because my little face is pretty delicate and I don't want it to stretch out. So I'm painting directly on the cake and I want to get the sizing correct. So now that the face is on, I'm going to focus on decorating the bottom tier. So before I put the fondant pieces on, I'm actually gonna put the border along the bottom just because it's helpful to have the border in place before you put the pieces because you want everything like centered on the cake. So by trial and error, I learned to put the border on first. And I always start in the back of the cake. Just give it a few. And I'm just using like a medium-sized French tip here. And I did the black because I just thought the contrast would look really nice. So now I'm going to place my plaque. So same thing, just painting it with dab and hold. And next I'm going to start placing my polka dots. Thing to do is add our topper, and I'm going to carefully place this in. And I'm putting a cake pop stick behind the ears because they need a little extra support. Alright, so my Minnie Mouse cake is complete and I love how she turned out, and most importantly, I hope that Scarlett loves her 3rd birthday cake. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.